Hello, I'm Brianna.
And I'm Sierra.
And this is TC, and we're coming to you to bring information related to the merger of Kraft and Heinz in the year 2015.
First, I'll be talking a little bit about the details. The first offer came in on February 8th, 2015, when Heinz owners 3G Capital and Berkshire Hathaway sent a written offer to Kraft, offering Kraft's investors 47% ownership interest and a $12.50 per share dividend. After negotiations, Heinz and Kraft agreed to merge on March 25th, 2015, giving Kraft investors 49% ownership interest and a $16.50 per share dividend. The management of the two companies hoped to leverage the synergies of the combination to create greater economies of scale and expand the scope of certain product lines. For example, Heinz had a global footprint, while Kraft made 98% of its sales in the North American market. The combined company could expand Kraft into international markets while reducing costs overall in the North American market. The two estimated that they could save $1.7 billion annually by the end of 2017. The match was reviewed and approved by the Competition Bureau due to low barriers to entry, remaining competition, and the little overlap between the products of Kraft and Heinz. Negotiations only lasted for about a month and a half. On February 8th, Kraft received the first written offer, and by March 24th, the merger was approved by the board. After the first offer, Kraft's board initially felt that the company was being undervalued, and they approved CEO John Cahill to meet with possible competition, referring to them in filings simply as Company A and Company B. On March 4th, Mr. Cahill met with the CEO of Company A, while Kraft's board told Heinz that it would be willing to consider a better offer, and on March 24th, they approved the deal giving 49% ownership to Kraft. When the merger was announced, Heinz was actually a private company, and thus they had no stock to change. However, Kraft stock increased by roughly 37% to about $84 a share. This increase suggested that investors were more confident in Kraft as a part of Kraft Heinz than on its own. And now, Sierra will talk about the acquirer's financial reporting.
Okay, and I'm gonna, as Brianna said, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the acquirer's first reporting. So like Brianna mentioned previously, Heinz was the acquirer of Kraft for 51%, and while the initial announcement was made on March 25th, the merger didn't officially happen until July 2nd, 2015. Below you can see a little more information about the consideration paid by Heinz. In total, they paid roughly $52.6 billion, which can be broken down into the consideration given for the stock, which comes out to about $42.8 billion, and then Heinz also paid a special cash dividend for Kraft shareholders of $16.5 per share, which comes out to, in total, $9.8 billion. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the legal form of Kraft Heinz. We determined that this acquisition is a statutory consolidation. Heinz acquired Kraft through capital stock, and then as of July 2nd, they merged into a new legal entity, Kraft Heinz, and all of their net assets were put into the new company. You can further see evidence of this on their 10-K, where they compare the predecessor to the successor amounts in their financial statements, as opposed to a regular yearly comparison you might see on other financial statements. Here are a few effects of the acquisition on the consolidated balance sheet. The fair value of the assets acquired were about 47.1% of the total consolidated assets, and the fair value of the liabilities assumed were roughly 60.5% of the consolidated liabilities. This shows that the two companies were roughly about the same size, and it made a big difference in the amounts when they were reporting together. Another effect on the financial statements were the additional intangible assets that were added to their balance sheet. A new intangible asset was added to show the customer relationships that were obtained from Kraft. This asset was given a useful life of 29 years, and we have reasoned that this is due to the fact that the consumer tastes change over time. Other definite life intangibles were also reported in their notes with a useful life of 24 years, but there was no breakdown given as to what those were. They also reported goodwill from the sale of a little over $29 billion, which is a huge number, and about 50% of the assets they actually acquired in the merger. And TC will talk a little bit more about this later, how this large number has ended up hurting the company in the future. Lastly, I wanted to mention the integration program Kraft Heinz has implemented This program was implemented after the 2015 merger, basically estimating that the company will spend $1.9 billion over the next few years on restructuring. Expenses included in this program were organizational expenses and severance packages, to name just a few examples. The 2015 expenses for this program were $829 million. This was the second most expensive year that we've researched so far. This expense was also about 1.3 times their net loss for the year. So it wasn't clear in the beginning if this was a good investment, but huge restructuring expenses and net loss in the first year are expected when you have a merger. So now I turn it over to TC to talk a little more about, to give a little more information about the subsequent reporting. All right, go.
And thank you, Sierra. This is TC, and now we're going to turn our focus on the reporting after the acquisition date. And what we found out through the published annual reports was that for 2016, 17, 18, there definitely were still consolidated financial statements that included both Kraft and Heinz as one company. We've moved into researching and understanding if the ownership percentage has changed since the acquisition. And what we found is that Berkshire Hathaway still owns their percentage, but 3G in 2019 sold off 25 million of their shares, reducing their holdings by 9%. But otherwise, the ownership percentages seem to have been holding about the same, other than institutional investors picking up a lot of shares in 2019. The post-acquisition restructuring, as Sierra mentioned, is that there was a multi-year integration program that had original estimated cost of $1.9 billion. And here we see that on 2016, 17, and 18 financial statements, there was a 24%, 3.2, and 0.8% impact on net income, respectively. Now, one of the big changes that has happened since the acquisition is a huge goodwill impairment. This goodwill impairment came as a shock and chagrin to the investors. The merger happened in 2015. In 2016, the financial statements did not report any impairment, but they did disclose some potential issues in the notes. In 2017, we see them report $30.5 billion in goodwill, and it's allocated to all the different segments. 2018 is when we hit the wall. It was a large goodwill impairment or a write-down on the financial statement assets. Since the assets that were brought over in the acquisition, 50% of it was goodwill. And then in 2018, there was a $7.3 billion goodwill impairment, which was basically writing down 17% of that goodwill that was brought over. So this was not good. It left a bad taste in the investors' mouths. Even though they love ketchup and macaroni and cheese, they were not thrilled with this impairment. This impairment came about due to a shift in consumer taste from highly processed products, which is what the major product mix was of these two companies, to now consumers are craving fresh food alternatives. We also saw a possibility of a higher interest rate from the Federal Reserve, and some notes in the financial statements and annual reports mentioned short-term developments. Actually, I think this was in the news press releases. Short-term developments in the second part of 2018 that was not part of the annual routine impairment brought up further issues. So you can see in this little chart on the left side that in 2018, Kraft Heinz was way above where any of the other companies had been in the previous 10 years. So this unexpected goodwill impairment was shocking to all involved. And we can see the impact on the operating income. At the merger date, we see from that point on that earnings started to climb after the merger until they hit the wall in 2018 with a really large loss that was related to this goodwill impairment. Things are on the rebound in 2019, and so things are getting back to where they were, but still not where they were prior to the hit in 2018. There has been some good and bad news in recent days, and Kraft Heinz because of the COVID-19 outbreak, is doing some amazing things with donating 12 million globally, which includes Feeding America, which is an organization that takes care of people here. They are also focusing on their brand and product, I'm sorry, not their brand, but their product mix, and they're expecting net sales to increase in their organic sales by 6%. Kraft Heinz US President Carlos Abrams Rivera feels that the company is very fortunate to have long and deep relationships with consumers, and Sierra mentioned this earlier with the 29-year life. Mr. Rivera mentioned that it's one of their biggest competitive advantages, and that Heinz Kraft has many products that are woven into the fabric of consumers' lives. 97% of North American households have a Kraft Heinz product in their refrigerator or pantry, and they depend on innovation of the products to keep this consumer loyalty and relationship. They're going to be focusing on this organic section of their product mix, and hopefully that increase will go even higher. So it seems like it might be the time to buy Kraft Heinz stock. They've taken their hit in goodwill impairment. There was also an SEC filing that hit them in 2018 related to some of their accounting practices and stuff. So it seems like there was a big hit, went really negative, but perhaps things are coming back around. And actually, because of the pandemic, where people are stockpiling certain products. All of us love mac and cheese. All of us have a bottle of ketchup in our refrigerator, and many of us are stockpiling extras because of the uncertainty with the pandemic, and the impact that will have on Kraft's earnings for 2020 is uncertain, but is looking extremely positive. One other fun thing in the news recently was what happened during the Super Bowl 2019. Fans around the world were devastated when Mr. Peanut died. But then he was reborn and life was good again. So we look forward to what Kraft Heinz will do with their product mix and their future. And we thank you for paying attention to our presentation today.